I'd like to show you this gluing board that I made. It's used for gluing unusual shaped pieces together. If you have just two square pieces of wood to glue together, they're pretty easy to do. You just clamp them together. But here I'm gluing these triangular pieces together. Now this is going to be part of a bowl that I'm making. It's going to become the top ring. You see I've numbered them 1, 2, 2, 3, and it goes around and around. There's going to be 8 pieces. So I'll start out by gluing them together in groups of 2, and that's what this board will help me do. Part of the problem is when you glue something like this together and you're putting veneer between the 2 pieces as I do, then that creates a problem because the veneer is another source of making the joint uneven. Here is a piece of the veneer that I'm using, and if you look at it carefully you can see it's got a little wave to it. Now even if your veneer starts out completely flat, it could still warp the joint apart as the glue is absorbed if it absorbs it unevenly. But here, of course, since the veneer is already warped, I know that I'm going to have to put pressure on that joint to keep it nice and true. What I've done here is I've made this board, and if you look at this edge right here, you can see some evidence of what this is from. This is an old industrial door that was taken off and was going to the discard heap. The key issue is that if you look at the edge, you'll see it's a solid core door. This core material is fairly loose packed particle board. It's not like the high density stuff you get or even the medium density stuff you get at the hardware. And this makes it particularly good because it's easy to put a screw into. If you're going to make one of these out of something else, just keep in mind that you're going to want to put screws into it, and you might have to pre-drill holes. This particular type of material I don't have to pre-drill. What I've got also here are scrap pieces of wood, and this was just some miscellaneous plywood that I had from another project, and I kept the scraps for layup work, and this is one example of what those scraps are good for. You see I've got 2 pieces screwed down here, and underneath the pieces I put a piece of mylar. This mylar is from old drafting material. Here's an example of a drawing that was on mylar. This would be the top surface where the pencil marks will be made. I use it upside down. The shiny part the glue will not stick to. One thing you don't want is to glue up your piece on the board and then have it actually stick itself to the board too, because that obviously will destroy it. If you don't have mylar, which is very likely, you can probably use something like wax paper. That would also reject the glue. Just some kind of surface underneath it so that the glue can't stick, and make sure that that surface is underneath where the glue joint is going to be, which in this case is right here. I'm going to dry fit this, and I say, okay, that's good, that's what I want. I'm going to also know that I'm going to put the piece of veneer in here, and that's what I want to end up with. This veneer is a little bit wider than the boards are thick, so that I know I can push down on it, and you'll see why later as we put the glue in there and put the clamping force on. Now the clamping force is obviously supplied by something like this linear clamp here, and you can get these at a lot of the craft stores like Woodcraft and Peachtree. I think you can get them online. You can get them if you happen to be in a metropolitan area that has a store like Rockler or something like that. You can get these clamps. And they're also industrial clamps. You can get them at hardware or actually tool stores, tool supply houses. And these are useful, they work. But I've also found that something else that works is a simple wedge block system like this. Here you've got just 2 pieces of wood. It's the same plywood that I was using before, and I simply cut it on a diagonal and sanded that line so that it's nice and smooth. These will slide fairly easily. You also see that the angle is fairly shallow. You don't want a really sharp angle here. You want something fairly shallow, probably in the 10 to 20 degree range, because when you do that, once you slide them together, they'll actually lock in place. Again, you'll see that very shortly. What I'm going to do is, now that I know this is the joint that I want, I'm going to set up this clamping system. But I also want to point out something else. Look at this piece of wood here. That's an interesting shape. What it's intended to do is this. If I push just on this corner, the forces will actually try and tip this up, and you'll end up with a gap in the glue joint. I want the force to be somewhat close to the center line of the joint. Now imagine if you're going to hold this by hand, you would do that automatically as you're pushing. And you see, I can push it like this and get what I want. But if I push it like this, I've got to concentrate on keeping the force on this finger. And that's roughly what this does. It's got a little place to hook on one of the corners here. And then it bridges around and pushes here, and it's rounded up here. So when I put my clamp force now, it's going to be in this range, and it'll hold that joint nice and tight. When you clamp a joint like this, you'll put some glue in there, and you'll put force on it. And when you do that, you'll discover that this piece of veneer will likely want to shoot up. The reason for that is it acts just like a piece of wood would behave if you threw it in water. You know yourself, if you try and push a piece of wood down below the surface of the water, the farther down you try to push it, the more force is trying to push it back up. That's because the water pressure increases with depth. Here, you're kind of simulating high pressure when you put force on that joint. And that glue becomes a high pressure point, and the wood wants to escape. So the reason you cut that veneer kind of tall is so you can keep finger pressure down until it actually grips it. Let's move ahead now, and we'll glue this joint together, and you'll get to see all of these processes in action. I'm just using conventional yellow wood glue on these, and that's just perfect for what I'm doing. And I like to spread this around a bit so that I know I'm covering all the surface area. And make sure you have enough. You can have too little. If you have too much, it'll simply shoot out. But if you have too little, you will not get a good joint. Now here goes the veneer on there. And now I'm going to put the next layer of glue on the veneer and spread that around. Clearly, accuracy is not called for at this point. You just want to make sure all the surface area is covered. Now, I'm going to lay this down here. See, these two blocks capture it, so it can't move around. Oop, there's another piece of veneer I didn't want. Here now, 2 is going to 2. And I'm going to begin to push that together. While I'm pushing it together, I'm holding down on the veneer so it stays down. Now I'm ready to put my little funny block in here. Put that in place. And if I push with my finger, the glue will start to exit, and I'm getting a good joint. Now I want it to be held there under pressure. So now I'm going to put these in place, and the way this works is very simple. You just push them together and squeeze. And as you do that, they'll impart the force this way, and they'll also lock in place. as you're holding everything with your other hand until everything's taken a set. Now you're good to just let it go, and it'll stay there until the glue takes a set. I usually will let this set for 15 to 20 minutes before I take it out and put the next one in. Like I said, I'll do this in groups of 2, and then I'll glue the whole assembly together. But I wanted to show you the way to glue oddball shapes together using a gluing table that you can construct largely out of scrap material.